There is a moment that comes to every human being. It arrives without warning, usually in the quiet hours when the world has stopped demanding your performance. You might be driving home from a celebration of your accomplishments. You might be standing in a mirror after a successful presentation. You might be lying next to someone who loves the version of you that you've constructed. And in that moment, a question rises from somewhere deep beneath your consciousness, like a forgotten memory surfacing from dark water. Who is this person I have become? Not in the philosophical sense we discuss at dinner parties, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a genuine, terrifying confusion. You look at your life, the career you've built, the relationships you maintain, the image you project, and you feel nothing. Or worse, you feel a stranger looking back at you through your own eyes. The furniture of your existence is arranged perfectly. The photographs tell a story of success. The social media carefully curates a narrative of fulfillment. But somewhere inside, in a place you've learned to silence, there is a scream that never quite reaches your lips. This is not depression, though it may wear that mask. This is not burnout, though exhaustion is its companion. This is something far more ancient and far more dangerous. The slow, almost imperceptible death of the authentic self. The cost of living a life that looks good but feels wrong. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the architecture of false identities. We will descend into the psychology of performance, the philosophy of masks, and the neuroscience of self-betrayal. We will explore how you became a stranger to yourself, why society rewards this estrangement, and what it costs you, not in failure, but in the quiet erosion of your soul. This is not a story about finding yourself. That phrase has been emptied of meaning by greeting cards and self-help platitudes. This is about something far more urgent. Recognizing that you have been living as an imposter in your own life, and that every day you continue this performance, something irreplaceable is dying inside you. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Marcus. He doesn't exist as a single person, but he exists in fragments across millions of lives. Marcus is 43. He has a corner office with a view that would make most people weep with envy. His salary has 6 figures and is climbing. He drives a car that turns heads. His children attend the best schools. His wife is beautiful and accomplished. His friends, and he has many, regard him as successful, stable, admirable. Marcus wakes up every morning at 5:30. He has trained himself to do this. He reads the news, checks his investments, reviews his calendar. He exercises, 30 minutes of precisely calculated cardio, because he has read that successful people maintain their bodies with the same discipline they apply to their portfolios. He showers, dresses in clothes that cost more than his father earned in a month, and drives to work listening to podcasts about optimization, leadership, innovation. At work, he is effective, respected. He chairs meetings with confidence. He makes decisions that affect hundreds of people. He navigates office politics with the skill of a chess master. He speaks the language of his industry fluently, the jargon, the frameworks, the buzzwords that signal belonging. He has learned to laugh at the right jokes, to show concern at the appropriate moments, to project exactly the amount of ambition that inspires trust without threatening his superiors. He returns home. He asks his children about their days in the way good fathers do. He listens to his wife talk about her work, her concerns, her plans. He nods. He responds. He is present in the way that presence is performed in modern life, physically there, mentally tracking, emotionally, somewhere else. At night, after his family is asleep, Marcus sometimes stands in his home office, looking at the awards on his wall, the degrees, the photographs of him shaking hands with important people, and he feels nothing. Or rather, he feels something so terrifying that he has learned to drink just enough wine to blur its edges. He feels like he is looking at evidence of someone else's life, a life he has been hired to live, a role he has been performing so long that he has forgotten there was ever an audition, ever a choice to decline the part. Who wrote this script? When did he agree to these lines? And most disturbing of all, if this isn't his life, then where is he? Where is the real Marcus? This is the question that haunts our age. We live in an era of unprecedented external success and internal emptiness. We have more tools for performance than any generation in history. Social media platforms, personal branding strategies, carefully curated images, strategic networking. We have turned life itself into a resume, a highlight reel, a pitch deck for a self we hope will be accepted, admired, envied. But there is a cost. And that cost is paid in a currency we rarely discuss, the slow suicide of the authentic soul. The ancient Greeks had a word, persona. It meant the mask worn by actors in theatre, the mask that amplified their voice, that projected their character to the audience, that allowed them to become someone else. Over time, this word evolved to mean the social face we present to the world, the version of ourselves we perform for others. But here is what we have forgotten. The Greeks knew the mask was temporary. The actor removed it after the performance. There was a clear distinction between the role and the reality, between the performance and the person. We have lost this distinction. We have worn our masks so long that we have forgotten they are masks. The performance has become the person. The role has consumed the actor. And we call this maturity. We call this professionalism. We call this success. But late at night, in the quiet moments, the real self, the one we buried beneath layers of performance, sometimes claws its way toward consciousness. It emerges as anxiety without object, as dissatisfaction without cause, as a profound sense that something is wrong, even when everything looks right. This is the cost, not failure, not poverty, not social rejection, but something far more insidious, the slow realization that you have built a beautiful prison and you are both the architect and the inmate. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the psyche's depths, understood this. He wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases, but we live in an age that demands we all wear the same shoe. Corporate culture, social media, educational systems, family expectations, they all prescribe a particular shape for a successful life. And we force ourselves into that shape, even as it deforms us, even as it pinches and cuts and slowly cripples our authentic movement through the world. Jung called the mask we wear the persona. But he was careful to distinguish between a healthy persona, a flexible social adaptation, and the identification with the persona, where we mistake the mask for the face. When this happens, Jung warned, we lose contact with what he called the self, the true center of our being. We become hollow. We become ghosts haunting the machinery of our own lives. This is not a metaphor. Neuroscience has begun to reveal the physical reality of this split. When you consistently act in ways that contradict your core values, when you suppress your authentic responses to maintain a social performance, your brain shows patterns of stress that mirror physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain that detects errors and conflicts, lights up like a warning system. Your body knows you are lying, even when your conscious mind has learned to believe the performance. Over time, this chronic self-betrayal reshapes your neural architecture. The pathways that connect you to your authentic feelings, desires, and values begin to atrophy. The pathways that support the performance grow stronger. You become, quite literally, a different person, the person who looks good, the person who fits, the person who succeeds. And the cost? The cost is paid in fragments of self you can never recover, in creativity that dies unuttered, in love that remains unexpressed, in joy that becomes a memory of a memory, in a life that, when you finally pause to examine it, feels like it belongs to someone else. Tonight, we will explore how this happens. We will trace the origins of this split, from childhood adaptations to cultural pressures to the architecture of modern capitalism. We will descend into the mechanisms of self-betrayal, the psychological tricks we play, the stories we tell ourselves, the ways we learn to silence our own screams. We will examine the cost, not in abstract terms, but in the concrete reality of lives half-lived, relationships half-felt, days that pass like shadows across a wall. And then, if you can bear it, we will explore the possibility of return, the terrifying journey back to the self you abandoned, the awakening that feels like death because it requires the dismantling of everything you have built, the cost of authenticity, which is every bit as high as the cost of performance, but pays in a different currency. This will not be comfortable. Truth rarely is. But comfort is what got us into this prison. Comfort and fear and the desperate need to be accepted by a world that only accepts masks. Are you ready? Are you willing to look at the life you have built and ask the most dangerous question of all, is this mine, or am I just visiting someone else's dream? Let us begin. How we learn to disappear. Every act of self-betrayal begins in innocence. You were not born with a mask. You arrived in this world as pure authenticity, a bundle of needs, desires, sensations, and responses. You cried when you hurt. You laughed when you delighted. You reached for what you wanted and recoiled from what you feared. You were, in those early moments, nothing but yourself. And then the world began its work. The socialization of a human being is necessary. No one disputes this. We cannot function in society as pure instinct and authentic impulse. We must learn language, customs, consideration of others. We must develop what psychologists call affect regulation, the ability to modulate our emotional responses to fit social context. But somewhere in this necessary process, something goes wrong. The adaptation becomes amputation. The social self stops being a tool we use and becomes a prison we inhabit. The persona stops being a flexible mask and becomes a permanent face. How does this happen? Let us go back to the beginning. Imagine a child. Call her Sarah. She is 4 years old. She is at a family gathering, and something happens that frightens her. Perhaps a relative speaks too loudly. Perhaps the crowd overwhelms her sensitive nervous system. Perhaps she witnesses an argument between adults. Her authentic response is to cry, to seek comfort, to express her fear. But her parents are worried about appearances. They are concerned about what the relatives will think. So they say, with the best intentions, "Don't cry. You're okay. Big girls don't cry. Don't be so sensitive." In that moment, Sarah receives a message that will echo through her entire life. Your authentic feelings are unacceptable. Your real responses are wrong. To be loved, to be accepted, you must hide what you actually feel and perform what others expect. This is not abuse. This is normal parenting in our culture, but it is the first brick in the wall between Sarah and herself. The process continues. At school, Sarah learns quickly that certain behaviors are rewarded and others are punished. Sitting still is good, even when her body wants to move. Raising her hand is appropriate, even when she wants to shout her answer with excitement. Agreeing with the teacher is safe, even when she disagrees. Following the crowd is smart, even when it contradicts her instincts. Layer by layer, year by year, Sarah learns the intricate choreography of acceptable selfhood. She learns what to say and what to silence. She learns what to feel, or at least what to show. She learns that there is a version of her that people like, and there is a version of her that makes people uncomfortable. The choice seems obvious. By adolescence, the transformation is nearly complete. Sarah has learned to monitor herself constantly. She has internalized a surveillance system more effective than any external authority. She watches herself through the imagined eyes of others. She edits her responses before they reach her lips. She has become, in the language of sociology, a disciplined subject, someone who has learned to discipline herself according to social norms without needing external enforcement. This is called maturity. This is called growing up. This is called becoming a functioning member of society. But what has been lost? Where did the authentic Sarah go? The one who cried when she was frightened, who moved when her body demanded movement, who spoke her truth without calculation. She didn't die. Death would be cleaner. Instead, she was buried alive, placed in what Jung called the shadow, the repository of all the parts of ourselves we have learned are unacceptable. She lives there still, in the basement of Sarah's psyche, occasionally banging on the floorboards, occasionally seeping through the cracks in the form of anxiety, depression, mysterious physical symptoms, or sudden inexplicable outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. This process, this systematic burial of the authentic self, is what psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called the development of the false self. Winnicott, working with children in post-war Britain, observed that some children developed what appeared to be perfect adaptation. They were compliant, successful, well-liked, but they were also, he noticed, strangely lifeless. There was something missing, a spark, a spontaneity, an aliveness. What Winnicott discovered was that these children had learned to present a version of themselves that their environment demanded, while their true self, their authentic core, went into hiding. The false self managed life competently, but it was a management system, not a lived experience. It was survival, not existence. The tragedy, Winnicott observed, was that the false self could achieve remarkable external success. It could build careers, maintain relationships, raise children, contribute to society. But the person behind the false self felt increasingly dead. They felt like frauds, imposters, actors who had forgotten they were acting. Now expand this individual psychology to the scale of culture, and you begin to understand the modern condition. We live in what sociologist Irving Goffman called the presentation of self in everyday life, a theater where everyone is performing and everyone is watching everyone else's performance. Goffman, writing in the 1950s, analyzed social interaction as if it were a dramatic production. There was a front stage where we perform our social roles and a backstage where we could briefly be ourselves. But something has happened since Goffman's time. The proliferation of social media has eliminated the backstage. There is nowhere now where we are not potentially performing, where our performance is not potentially being recorded, judged, shared. The theater has become total. The audience is everywhere. And so the performance must be constant. This has profound implications. When there is no backstage, when there is no space where the mask can come off, then the distinction between person and persona collapses. We don't perform our lives. We perform our lives so constantly that the performance becomes the life. Consider the architecture of social media platforms. They are designed, with extraordinary psychological sophistication, to encourage curation over authenticity. Every post is a performance, every photo is edited, every update is crafted to project a particular image. We have become directors of our own reality shows, and the editing never stops. The metrics, likes, followers, shares, comments function as a constant feedback system, training us to refine our performance. We learn what version of ourselves gets rewarded. We learn what authenticity gets punished with silence. We learn, with the precision of laboratory animals pressing levers, how to perform the self that succeeds in this economy of attention. But here is what the platforms don't show: the cost, the exhaustion of constant performance, the anxiety of maintaining the image, the depression that comes from comparing your backstage reality with everyone else's front stage performance, the slow erosion of your ability to know what you actually think, feel, or want, because all your energy is devoted to calculating what you should appear to think, feel, or want. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre had a concept he called bad faith, the act of lying to oneself. Bad faith occurs when we pretend that we are fixed, determined, that we have no choice but to be what we are. It is the waiter who becomes so identified with being a waiter that he loses sight of the fact that he is a human being who happens to be waiting tables. It is the executive who becomes so fused with her role that she cannot distinguish her authentic desires from her professional obligations. Sartre believed that bad faith was a flight from the terrifying freedom of authentic existence. To be authentic, in his view, meant to accept that we are radically free, radically responsible for creating ourselves. But this freedom is overwhelming. It offers no script, no guarantee, no safety net. So we flee into roles, into identities that feel solid and predetermined. We choose the prison of a fixed self over the vertigo of freedom. In our contemporary context, bad faith has become systematic. The culture itself encourages it. Capitalism, in its current form, requires constant self-optimization, self-branding, self-marketing. You are not simply a person, you are a product. Your resume is an advertisement. Your LinkedIn profile is a commercial. Your entire life becomes a pitch for a self that will be hired, chosen, validated. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the achievement society, a world where we are no longer disciplined by external authorities, but by internalized demands to achieve, optimize, perform. We become entrepreneurs of ourselves. We exploit ourselves more efficiently than any boss could, because the boss is inside our heads, and she never sleeps. The cost of this? Han argues that it leads to a new form of psychological crisis, not the neurosis of the old disciplinary society, but the depression and burnout of the achievement society. We are exhausted not because we are oppressed, but because we are free. Free to work harder, free to optimize more, free to perform better. And we do, until we collapse. But there is another cost, one that Han doesn't fully address, the cost to authenticity itself. When your entire existence becomes a project of optimization and performance, when every aspect of your life is evaluated according to its value in the marketplace of success, then there is no space left for the parts of yourself that have no market value. The parts that are messy, unproductive, weird, vulnerable, the parts that simply want to exist without justification. These parts don't die. They go underground. They become what Jung called the shadow. All the aspects of ourselves we cannot integrate into our conscious persona, and the larger the shadow grows, the more energy it takes to keep it suppressed. This energy manifests as anxiety, as depression, as psychosomatic illness, as the vague sense that something is wrong even when everything looks right. Let me give you a concrete example of how this operates in modern professional life. Consider the concept of emotional labor, a term coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild. Hochschild studied flight attendants and discovered that they were not just performing physical tasks, they were required to perform emotions. They had to smile, to be friendly, to radiate warmth, regardless of how they actually felt. This emotional performance, Hochschild found, came at a cost. When you are required to perform emotions that contradict your authentic feelings, you begin to lose contact with what you actually feel. The performance becomes so habitual that you can't distinguish it from reality. You smile automatically. You are friendly reflexively. And somewhere deep inside, you have no idea if you are happy or miserable, because you have been performing happiness for so long that the distinction has collapsed. Now consider. This is not just true for flight attendants. This is the condition of modern professional life. You perform enthusiasm in meetings even when you are bored. You perform concern for projects you don't care about. You perform friendliness toward colleagues you dislike. You perform confidence when you are terrified. You perform certainty when you are confused. Every day, in countless interactions, you betray your authentic responses to maintain your professional persona. And every betrayal is a small death, a small abandonment of the self you actually are in favor of the self you are required to be. Multiply this across years, across decades, and you begin to understand how someone can wake up at 43, successful, accomplished, admired, and feel like a stranger to themselves. The question we must ask is, how did we create a world where this is normal? How did we construct a society that rewards self-betrayal and punishes authenticity? The answer lies partly in the architecture of modern capitalism. In previous eras, you sold your labor, your physical capacity to work. But in the contemporary economy, you sell something more intimate, your personality, your creativity, your emotional availability. You don't just work, you bring your whole self to work, which means your whole self becomes a resource to be exploited, a product to be marketed, a brand to be managed. This represents a profound colonization of the self. There is no longer any part of you that is not potentially valuable to your employer, your network, your personal brand. Your hobbies become skills. Your personality becomes leadership qualities. Your authenticity becomes personal branding. Everything is transformed into capital. Everything must justify its existence through productivity. In this system, the authentic self, the part of you that exists for no purpose other than to exist, that has value beyond its utility, has no place. It becomes, quite literally, worthless. And so it must be suppressed, hidden, abandoned. But there is another source of this pressure, one that predates capitalism, the family system. Family therapist Murray Bowen developed a theory of what he called differentiation of self, the process by which we separate our authentic identity from the expectations and demands of our family system. Bowen observed that families function as emotional units, with unspoken rules about who should be what, who should feel what, who should play what role. Children who are highly sensitive to the family's emotional field learn to adapt themselves to maintain family harmony. They become what the family needs them to be. The anxious child learns to be the stable one. The sensitive child learns to be tough. The wild child learns to be compliant. Each abandons part of themselves to maintain their place in the family system. This adaptation is often so successful that it becomes invisible. The child doesn't feel like they're pretending. They believe this is who they are. The false self becomes so naturalized, so automatic, that it feels more real than the buried, authentic self. And here is the tragic paradox. The more successful you are at this adaptation, the more you will be praised. You become the easy child, the mature child, the one who has it all together. Your family rewards your self-betrayal with love and approval. And you learn the fundamental equation that will govern your life. Authentic self, rejection. False self, acceptance. Once this equation is established, it replicates itself across every domain of your life. You seek relationships where you can perform the acceptable self and avoid relationships where your authentic self might emerge. You choose careers that reward your performance skills and avoid paths that would require vulnerability. You construct an entire life around maintaining the false self because that false self has been the key to survival, until one day it isn't, until one day the cost becomes unbearable, until one day you wake up and realize that you have been living someone else's life, following someone else's script, and you have no idea how to find your way back to yourself. This is the descent. This is the crisis. This is what Jung called the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when everything you have repressed demands recognition. This is what we will explore in Act 2. But before we descend, I want you to understand something crucial. This is not your fault. You did not choose this path out of weakness or cowardice. You chose it out of the most fundamental human need, the need to be loved, to belong, to survive. You adapted because adaptation was necessary. You performed because performance was rewarded. You buried your authentic self because your authentic self was too dangerous to the systems that sustained you. The tragedy is not that you made this choice. The tragedy is that you made it so young, so unconsciously, that you forgot it was a choice at all. The tragedy is that you became so skilled at the performance that you forgot you were performing. But here is the hope, the possibility that justifies this entire exploration. You can remember. You can wake up. You can begin the terrifying journey back to yourself. The cost will be high. The path will be painful. But the alternative, continuing to live as a stranger to yourself, is a living death. Let us now descend into that darkness, into the conflict at the heart of the divided self. The architecture of self-betrayal. There comes a point in the journey of self-betrayal where the facade begins to crack. Not catastrophically, not all at once, but in small fissures that spread through the structure of your carefully constructed life. These cracks often appear precisely when you achieve what you thought you wanted: the promotion, the relationship, the recognition. You reach the summit of your ambition and discover that the view is empty. This is the paradox at the heart of false success. The more you get what you thought you wanted, the less you feel anything at all. Let us return to Marcus, standing in his home office late at night, staring at the evidence of a successful life. What he is experiencing is not simply dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction would suggest that he knows what he wants and hasn't gotten it. What Marcus feels is something more destabilizing. He has gotten what he wanted, or at least what he thought he wanted, and it means nothing. This is the crisis of the false self. You work for decades to build a life that looks good, and then one day you realize that looking good was the entire project. There was no deeper purpose. There was no authentic self being served. There was only the endless performance, the constant management of appearances, the exhausting maintenance of an image that has become more real to others than you are to yourself. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the psychological distress that arises when your actions contradict your values, when your outer life contradicts your inner reality. But cognitive dissonance is too clinical a term for what actually happens. What happens is more like a slow poisoning. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you smile when you want to scream, every time you perform enthusiasm for work that deadens your soul, you are swallowing a small dose of poison. One dose won't kill you, but they accumulate. They build up in your system, and eventually they begin to manifest as symptoms. The symptoms can be physical, chronic fatigue, mysterious pains, immune system problems, digestive issues. Your body keeps the score, as psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk has documented. Your body knows you are lying, even when your conscious mind has learned to believe the performance. And your body tries to tell you, in the only language it has, pain, illness, exhaustion. The symptoms can be psychological: anxiety without clear cause, depression that doesn't respond to medication, a pervasive sense of emptiness or meaninglessness. You might have everything society says should make you happy, but happiness feels like a foreign language you never quite learn to speak. The symptoms can be existential: a feeling of being detached from your own life, of watching yourself from a distance, of going through the motions while some essential part of you is absent. This is what psychiatrists call derealization or depersonalization, a sense that your life is not quite real, that you are not quite real, that there is a fundamental unreality to your existence. These symptoms are not signs of failure. They are signals. They are your authentic self trying to communicate through the only channels left open, trying to tell you that something is fundamentally wrong with how you are living. But here is where the architecture of self-betrayal becomes truly diabolical. Instead of listening to these signals, we treat them as problems to be fixed. We take medication to suppress the anxiety. We drink to numb the emptiness. We work harder to outrun the depression. We double down on the performance, hoping that if we just do it better, if we just succeed more completely, the symptoms will disappear. This is what psychiatrist R.D. Laing called the politics of experience, the systematic invalidation of subjective experience by pathologizing it. Laing, working in the 1960s with patients labeled as schizophrenic, argued that what appeared as madness was often a sane response to insane situations. The person wasn't broken. The system they were trying to survive in was broken. Laing wrote, "The condition of alienation, of being asleep, of being unconscious, of being out of one's mind, is the condition of the normal man. What we call normality," Laing argued, "is actually a shared delusion. We have all agreed to live as if the performance is reality, to treat the mask as the face. And anyone who breaks this agreement, anyone whose authentic self rebels against the performance, is labeled as sick. This is the double bind. Your symptoms are telling you that you are living wrong, but the culture tells you that your symptoms are the problem. So you seek treatment for the symptoms while leaving the root cause, the fundamental betrayal of your authentic self, intact. Consider the epidemic of burnout in modern professional life. Burnout is typically framed as an individual problem. You didn't manage your stress well enough, you didn't maintain work-life balance, you didn't practice enough self-care. The solution, therefore, is individual. Better time management, meditation apps, wellness programs. But what if burnout is not an individual failure but a systemic symptom? What if burnout is what happens when you systematically betray your authentic self for the demands of your professional role? What if burnout is your psyche's way of going on strike, refusing to continue the performance? Psychologist Herbert Freudenberger, who coined the term burnout in the 1970s, worked with volunteers at free clinics. He noticed that the most dedicated, idealistic people were the ones who burned out most completely. They were people who had invested their authentic selves in their work, who believed their work mattered. And when the reality of institutional constraints, bureaucratic indifference, and systematic injustice contradicted their ideals, they didn't just get tired, they collapsed. Burnout, in this understanding, is not about working too hard. It's about the fundamental contradiction between your authentic values and the demands of the system you serve. It's about continuing to perform dedication, enthusiasm, and commitment long after the work has become meaningless to you. Now extrapolate this beyond professional life to life itself. What if the epidemic of depression, anxiety, and meaninglessness in modern society is not a collection of individual pathologies, but a collective symptom? What if millions of people are experiencing the same thing Marcus experiences in his home office, the slow realization that they have built lives that look successful but feel empty? The philosopher and psychologist William James, writing at the turn of the 20th century, distinguished between what he called the healthy-minded and the sick soul. The healthy-minded were those who could take life at face value, who could pursue success without existential questioning. The sick soul, in contrast, was haunted by the question of meaning, by the sense that something essential was missing even in the midst of worldly success. James's sympathies were with the sick soul. He believed that the healthy-minded were, in a sense, superficial, unable or unwilling to confront the deeper questions of existence. The sick soul, though tortured, was also more authentic, more willing to face the fundamental emptiness that success cannot fill. In our contemporary context, we pathologize the sick soul. We treat existential questioning as depression. We treat the search for meaning as a symptom to be medicated. We have created a society that rewards the healthy-minded, those who can perform success without asking why, and marginalizes the sick souls who insist that success is not enough. But the sick soul is not sick. The sick soul is awake. And awakening, in a culture built on delusion, feels like madness. Let me describe the internal architecture of this conflict more precisely, because understanding it is essential to any possibility of transformation. You contain, as Jung understood, multiple layers of self. There is the persona, the social mask, the performed self. There is the ego, the conscious identity, what you think of as I. There is the shadow, all the parts of yourself you have repressed, denied, disowned. And beneath all of these is what Jung called the self, the authentic center, the deepest truth of who you are. In healthy psychological development, these layers are in dialogue. The persona serves the ego acknowledges the shadow, and all of them remain connected to the self. But in the case of the false life, the persona has usurped everything. The persona becomes so dominant, so demanding, that it cuts off communication with the deeper layers. The ego identifies completely with the persona, believing that the performance is the person. The shadow grows enormous with all the repressed authentic material, and the self becomes inaccessible, a distant echo, a half-remembered dream. This internal structure creates what psychoanalysts call splitting, a divided consciousness where different parts of your psyche are at war with each other. The persona demands performance, the shadow demands recognition, the self demands authenticity, and you, caught in the middle, don't know which voice is yours. This splitting manifests in predictable patterns. You might find yourself living a double life, presenting one face to the world while maintaining a secret life that contains your authentic desires. The executive who is perfectly controlled at work but rages at home. The devoted parent who fantasizes about abandoning their family. The moral citizen who harbors forbidden desires. These are not signs of hypocrisy. They are symptoms of a divided self trying desperately to find expression for parts that have been exiled from the official life, or the splitting might manifest as paralysis. You find yourself unable to make decisions because every choice represents a victory for one part of yourself and a betrayal of another. Should you take the promotion that advances your career but kills your soul? Should you stay in the relationship that looks perfect but feels dead? Should you continue the life that everyone admires but that feels like slow suicide? These are not simply practical decisions, they are existential crises. Every choice is a declaration about who you are, about which self will be given permission to exist. And when you are deeply divided, any choice feels like an amputation. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard understood this existential paralysis. He wrote about the despair of willing to be oneself and the despair of not willing to be oneself. To will to be yourself requires accepting responsibility for your existence, for creating meaning in a meaningless universe. But to not will to be yourself is to live in bad faith, to flee from freedom into predetermined roles. Both forms of despair are torture. One is the torture of terrifying freedom. The other is the torture of living death. Most people, Kierkegaard observed, choose the living death. They choose the comfort of predetermined roles over the terror of authentic existence. They become what Kierkegaard called immediate men, people who never achieve real selfhood because they never confront the fundamental question of their existence. This is the cost we are examining, not just the practical cost of wrong choices, but the existential cost of never actually existing as yourself, of spending your life as an actor in a play you never chose, speaking lines you never wrote, playing a role that suffocates the person you might have been. Now let us examine the mechanisms by which this suffocation is maintained, because the architecture of self-betrayal is not just internal, it is reinforced by sophisticated external systems. Consider the structure of modern work life, the 40-hour work week, the performance reviews, the career ladders. These are not neutral structures. They are technologies of control that shape not just what you do, but who you become. The performance review, for instance, creates a perpetual state of surveillance where you learn to see yourself through the evaluative gaze of authority. You internalize this gaze, you become your own harshest evaluator. And in doing so, you lose the capacity for authentic self-assessment. You can no longer distinguish between what you actually value and what the system values. The career ladder creates a teleology, a predetermined path of advancement that defines success. Climbing becomes an end in itself, regardless of whether the destination has any meaning for you. The question, "Do I want this?" becomes indistinguishable from "Should I want this?" And before you know it, you are chasing promotions not because they serve your authentic purpose, but because climbing is what successful people do. Social media amplifies these mechanisms exponentially. Every platform is designed around quantifiable metrics, likes, followers, engagement. These metrics become the measure of your value. You learn to optimize your performance for the algorithm. You learn what content gets rewarded. You learn to present the version of yourself that succeeds in this economy of attention. But here is the insidious part. The algorithm doesn't just measure your performance, it shapes your consciousness. The constant feedback loop trains your brain. You begin to think in terms of what will perform well. You begin to evaluate your experiences not for their intrinsic meaning, but for their social media potential. The question, "Is this meaningful to me?" becomes, "Will this get likes?" This is what philosopher Bernard Stiegler called psychopower, the colonization of consciousness itself by technological systems. It's not just that you perform for others. It's that you lose the capacity to have experiences that are not performative. Your inner life becomes a rehearsal for your public presentation. The result is a peculiar form of alienation. You become a stranger to yourself, not because you are hiding your true self from others, but because you are hiding your true self from yourself. You have performed the false self so consistently, optimized it so thoroughly, that you no longer remember there was ever an alternative. This is the apex of the conflict. You are trapped in a life that looks successful but feels wrong, and you can't escape because you no longer know who you would be without the performance. The false self is the only self you remember. The authentic self is a distant rumor, a vague sense that something is missing, a voice so faint you're not sure it's real. And yet, it is real. And it is not silent. It speaks in your anxiety, your depression, your mysterious symptoms, your inexplicable dissatisfaction. It speaks in the moments when the performance slips, when you catch yourself in an unguarded moment and feel a rush of something you can't quite name. Grief, perhaps, for the life you never lived, or rage at the years spent living for others' approval, or simple, profound exhaustion at the effort of maintaining the mask. These moments are dangerous. They threaten the entire architecture you have built, and so you have developed sophisticated defenses against them. You rationalize. Everyone feels this way sometimes. You minimize. It's not that bad. Look at everything you have. You distract, work harder, consume more, stay busy. You project. The problem is your partner, your job, your circumstances, anything but the fundamental structure of your existence. These defenses work for a while. They keep the crisis at bay. They allow you to continue the performance. But they cannot work forever. Because the authentic self, no matter how deeply buried, does not die. It waits. It watches. And it will have its say, one way or another. When the defenses finally fail, when the symptoms can no longer be ignored, when the emptiness becomes unbearable, this is the dark night, the descent, the confrontation with everything you have been running from. This is the moment that feels like death because, in a sense, it is death. It is the death of the false self, the dissolution of the identity you have built your entire life around. Most people never reach this point. Most people die with their masks on, having performed till the very end. But some do. Some reach the point where continuing the performance becomes impossible, where the cost of looking good becomes higher than the cost of falling apart. And it is precisely here, at the point of maximum darkness, maximum crisis, maximum dissolution, that transformation becomes possible. Because you cannot build an authentic self on top of a false one. You cannot find yourself without first losing yourself. You cannot be reborn without dying. This is the descent. This is the necessary darkness. This is what we must pass through to reach the possibility of awakening. And it is to this awakening that we now turn. The archaeology of the authentic self. The awakening does not come as enlightenment. It does not arrive as a sudden clarity, a mystical insight, a blissful realization. It comes at first as destruction, as everything you have built crumbling, as the life that looked good revealing itself as a beautiful prison, as the mask cracking and falling away, leaving you raw and exposed and terrified. This is what the mystics call the dark night of the soul, what psychologists call a breakdown, what philosophers call existential crisis. But these terms domesticate something far more radical, the complete dissolution of the false self and the terrifying emergence of the authentic self that has been buried beneath it. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice, because the theory is useless without the lived reality. Marcus, our businessman standing in his office, reaches this point on a Tuesday. There is nothing special about the day. He wakes up, performs his morning routine, drives to work. He sits in a meeting about quarterly projections. Someone is speaking about market penetration, someone else is presenting a slide deck, and suddenly, without warning, Marcus cannot remember why any of this matters. Not in the existential sense. He has had those moments before. But in a more fundamental sense, He cannot remember why he is pretending to care. He cannot remember the logic that made this performance necessary. The entire architecture of meaning that sustained his professional life simply vanishes like a dream upon waking. He excuses himself, goes to his office, closes the door, and for the first time in 20 years he asks himself not, "What should I do?" but "What do I actually want to do?" The question terrifies him because he doesn't know the answer. He literally does not know what he wants. He has spent so long performing wants that he thought were his, the corner office, the recognition, the status, that he has lost contact with authentic desire. He is a sophisticated machine for appearing to want things, but beneath the performance, there is only emptiness. This moment, this terrifying emptiness, is actually the beginning. It is the first crack in the false self's armor, because you cannot rebuild until you acknowledge that what you have built is a prison. You cannot remember who you are until you admit that you have forgotten. You cannot begin the journey home until you recognize that you are lost. What happens next is what Jung called enantiodromia, the emergence of the opposite. Everything you have suppressed, everything you have denied, everything you have pushed into shadow begins to surface. The emotions you learned not to feel, the desires you learned not to want, the truths you learned not to speak. They rise up like ghosts, demanding recognition. For Marcus, this manifests as rage, sudden, overwhelming rage at the years he has spent performing, at the smile he has worn like a uniform, at every meeting where he performed enthusiasm, at every decision he made based on what looked good rather than what felt right, at the entire elaborate structure of his life that now reveals itself as a lie. This rage is necessary. It is the authentic self's first communication. It is saying, "I am still here. I have not died, and I am furious at what you have done to me." But the rage comes with terror, because dismantling the false self means facing the chaos underneath. It means acknowledging that you don't actually know who you are, that the identity you have built your entire adult life around is a construction, a performance, a sophisticated fake. And if that's not you, then who are you? This is the existential vertigo that Kierkegaard described, the dizziness of freedom. When the predetermined role falls away, when the script is torn up, you are faced with the overwhelming responsibility of creating yourself from nothing. No guidelines, no guarantees, no map, just the terrifying freedom to become. Most people cannot bear this. They retreat. They reconstruct the mask. They tell themselves it was just a phase, just stress, just a moment of weakness. They medicate the symptoms. They double down on the performance. They choose the familiar prison over the unknown wilderness. But some do not retreat. Some choose to stay in the darkness, to sit with the terror, to let the false self die completely. And it is here, in this voluntary descent, that transformation becomes possible. This process is what depth psychologists call regression in service of the ego, a deliberate return to earlier, more primitive states of consciousness in order to recover lost parts of the self. You must go backward to go forward. You must become, in a sense, a child again. Not in the sense of being immature, but in the sense of recovering the undefended authenticity you had before socialization taught you to perform. This regression is not comfortable. It involves feeling things you have learned not to feel. It involves saying things you have learned not to say. It involves wanting things you have learned not to want. It involves, most fundamentally, disappointing people, failing to perform the version of yourself they have come to expect and depend upon. And this is where the real cost reveals itself, because living authentically in a world built on performance means accepting that you will be misunderstood, judged, rejected. The people who loved your false self will not necessarily love your authentic self. The systems that rewarded your performance will not reward your authenticity. You may lose relationships, lose status, lose the external markers of success that you worked decades to achieve. This is not theoretical. This is the actual cost, and it is why most people never make this journey. because the cost of authenticity can feel higher than the cost of continued performance. But here is what you discover when you pay that cost. The alternative is not sustainable. The performance cannot continue indefinitely. Something inside you will eventually rebel. Your body will break down. Your mind will fragment. Your soul, if we can use that unfashionable word, will simply die, leaving you a functioning corpse going through the motions of a life. The choice, then, is not between authentic struggle and comfortable performance. The choice is between authentic struggle now or catastrophic collapse later, between voluntary transformation or involuntary breakdown, between conscious dying of the false self or unconscious death of everything. When you understand this, really understand it, the descent becomes bearable. Not easy, but bearable. Because you realize you are not losing something precious. You are releasing something poisonous. You are not destroying yourself. You are destroying a prison you mistook for yourself. So how does this actually work? How do you excavate an authentic self from beneath decades of performance? The first step is what psychoanalysts call mentalization, the capacity to observe your own mental states with curiosity rather than judgment. You must learn to notice when you are performing, to catch yourself in the act of calculating what you should feel rather than feeling what you feel, to observe the gap between your authentic response and your performed response. This sounds simple, but it is extraordinarily difficult, because the performance has become automatic, unconscious, neurologically wired. You perform the way you breathe, without thinking. Learning to notice the performance is like learning to notice your breathing. It requires deliberate, sustained attention. One technique that helps: start noticing your body's responses before you notice your thoughts. Your body often knows you are performing before your conscious mind does. Notice when your chest tightens. Notice when your jaw clenches. Notice when your breath becomes shallow. These physical responses are your authentic self trying to signal that something is wrong, that you are betraying yourself, that the performance is costing you. Once you can notice the performance, the second step is to create space for authentic response. This doesn't mean immediately acting on every authentic impulse. That would be chaos. But it means acknowledging the authentic response, even if you don't act on it. It means saying to yourself, I am performing enthusiasm right now, but actually I am bored. Or I am smiling and agreeing, but actually I disagree. Or I am saying I'm fine, but actually I am not fine. This simple acknowledgement, this honest internal reporting, begins to rebuild the connection between conscious awareness and authentic self. It re-establishes an internal dialogue that the performance had silenced. The third step is what Jung called active imagination, a deliberate engagement with the unconscious parts of yourself. This can take many forms: journaling without editing, art making without judging, movement without performing, any practice that allows unconscious material to surface without the censorship of the conscious ego. What you discover in this practice is shocking. There is someone underneath the performance, someone with desires, fears, preferences, values, dreams that you had completely lost contact with, someone who has been waiting, sometimes for decades, to be acknowledged. This recovered self is not immediately usable. It is raw, undeveloped, often wounded. It is the part of you that was frozen at whatever age you began the systematic performance. If you learn to perform at 7 years old, the authentic self that surfaces might have the emotional maturity of a 7-year-old. This is disorienting. You are a successful adult with a 7-year-old's authentic emotional responses buried inside you. But this is necessary. You cannot skip the developmental stages you missed. You must go back and recover them. You must let the 7-year-old speak, play, rage, cry. You must give that wounded child the permission to exist that they never received. This is what psychoanalysts call reparenting yourself, providing to your own wounded child self the acceptance and validation that your actual childhood denied. This process is messy. It is not linear. It does not follow a neat therapeutic arc. You will regress, You will doubt. You will be tempted to reconstruct the mask. There will be moments of profound grief. Grief for the years lost, grief for the life you never lived, grief for the self you abandoned. But there will also be moments of something else. Moments where you feel, perhaps for the first time in years, actually alive. Where you make a choice based on what you authentically want rather than what you should want. Where you speak a truth you have been silencing. Where you decline a performance you would have previously executed automatically. These moments are small at first, tiny rebellions against the tyranny of the false self, but they accumulate. They create new neural pathways. They establish new patterns. Slowly, very slowly, a different way of being begins to emerge. Now here is something crucial that most narratives of transformation miss. Becoming authentic does not mean becoming selfish, chaotic, or irresponsible. It does not mean abandoning all social roles and living as pure impulse. The goal is not to eliminate the persona, but to right-size it, to make it a flexible tool rather than a rigid prison. Jung was clear about this. The persona is necessary. We need the ability to adapt to social situations, to play different roles in different contexts. The problem is not having a persona. The problem is identifying completely with it, losing contact with the self beneath it. Healthy authenticity means having access to both, the ability to perform when performance is appropriate and the ability to release the performance when it is not. It means developing what psychologists call psychological flexibility, the capacity to shift between different states of being depending on context without losing your essential core. This flexibility is what distinguishes authentic adaptation from self-betrayal. Authentic adaptation serves your deeper values and purposes. Self-betrayal contradicts them. Authentic adaptation is conscious and chosen. Self-betrayal is automatic and compulsive. Authentic adaptation leaves you feeling integrated. Self-betrayal leaves you feeling divided. Learning to distinguish between these two is perhaps the most important skill you can develop. And it requires constant vigilance because the pull toward performance is always there. The systems that reward false success have not changed. The culture that values appearance over authenticity has not transformed. You are attempting to live authentically in a world built on performance, and that requires enormous strength. This is where community becomes essential. You cannot do this alone. You need mirrors, people who can reflect back to you when you are performing and when you are authentic. You need witnesses, people who see the struggle and validate its importance. You need guides, people who have walked this path before and can tell you that the darkness ends, that there is something on the other side of the dissolution. This might be therapy, it might be intimate friendship, it might be spiritual community, but it must be something, because attempting to dismantle your false self in isolation is overwhelming. You need people who can hold the truth of who you are while you recover it yourself. And here is the paradox. You must risk authentic relationship to recover your authentic self, but you cannot have authentic relationship until you recover your authentic self. This is the catch-22 of transformation. You need to show up as yourself to find people who love yourself, but you don't yet know who yourself is. The solution is courage, the willingness to show up as messily, imperfectly, partially authentically as you currently can, and to let that imperfect authenticity evolve in relationship. You learn to be yourself by practicing being yourself even when you're not sure who that is yet. Over time, months, years, something shifts. The authentic self becomes stronger, more coherent, more accessible. The false self becomes recognizable as a tool rather than an identity. You develop what psychologists call self-authorship, the capacity to write your own story rather than performing someone else's script. This does not mean you become perfectly authentic. That is not possible. It means you become authentically imperfect. You become someone who knows their own performance, who chooses it consciously when necessary, who can release it when it's not. You become integrated, not perfect, but whole. And with this integration comes something unexpected. Not happiness exactly, but aliveness. The capacity to feel things fully, joy and grief, connection and solitude, success and failure, without the numbing distance of performance. Life becomes vivid again. Difficult, certainly. Uncertain, absolutely. But vivid. Real. Yours. This is the awakening. Not to a better life, necessarily, but to your actual life. Not to success, but to reality. Not to comfort, but to truth. And in that truth, strange as it may sound, there is a profound relief. The relief of finally putting down the unbearable weight of performance. The relief of being seen and loved as you actually are, rather than as you pretend to be. The relief of knowing that whatever happens, at least it is happening to you, the real you, not to the ghost you have been performing. This is what was waiting on the other side of the dissolution. Not a better prison, but freedom. Terrifying, vertiginous freedom. The freedom to exist as yourself, whatever that turns out to mean. The price of being real. We have traveled far tonight. Through the origins of performance, through the architecture of self-betrayal, through the dark night of dissolution, to the possibility of authentic existence. We have seen how you became a stranger to yourself, and how you might find your way home. But I want to end with something that most transformational narratives avoid, the price. Because there is a price for authentic existence, just as there is a price for performance. The question is not whether you will pay, but which price you are willing to pay. The price of performance, as we have seen, is the slow death of the authentic self. It is the morning when you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back. It is the achievement that means nothing. It is the success that feels like failure. It is the quiet desperation of a life that looks good but feels wrong. But the price of authenticity is also high. It is the relationships you will lose when you stop performing the person others need you to be. It is the opportunities that will pass you by when you choose meaning over status. It is the judgment of a culture that values appearance over substance. It is the loneliness of living truthfully in a world built on beautiful lies. Neither path is easy, neither path is safe. The question is, which difficulty can you live with? Which price honors the life you actually have? I cannot answer that for you. No one can. This is the fundamental existential choice that each person must make for themselves. But I can tell you this. One price is paid in dying. The other is paid in living. One price purchases comfort at the cost of soul. The other purchases soul at the cost of comfort. Marcus, standing in his office, eventually made his choice. He didn't quit his job dramatically. He didn't burn down his life. But he stopped pretending. He started saying no to projects that deadened his soul. He started admitting when he was exhausted rather than performing energy. He started having actual conversations rather than performing connection. He started, slowly and clumsily, to become himself. Some people were confused. Some were disappointed. Some relationships ended. His career trajectory flattened. He would never make CEO now, and he knew it. But something else happened. He started sleeping without medication. The chest pains disappeared. He looked in the mirror and recognized the person looking back. He started having days, not every day, but some days, when he felt genuinely, surprisingly, unexpectedly alive. Was it worth it? He doesn't know yet. He may never know. But he knows this. He is paying a price he chose rather than a price that was chosen for him. And there is dignity in that. There is power in that. There is, finally, the beginning of actual existence. This is what I want to leave you with tonight. You have a choice. Not an easy choice, not a comfortable choice, but a choice nonetheless. You can continue living the life that looks good, but feels wrong. You can maintain the performance, manage the symptoms, optimize the image. Many people do. Most people do. There is no shame in it. Survival is survival. Or you can begin the terrifying journey home to yourself. You can start noticing the performance. You can start listening to the whispers of your authentic self beneath the noise of who you should be. You can start making small choices toward truth, even when truth costs you. You can start the slow, painful, necessary work of recovery, recovering the parts of yourself you abandoned, the dreams you deferred, the life you were too afraid to live. The world will not make this easy. The world profits from your performance. Your false success generates value for systems that care nothing about your soul. Your authentic awakening threatens those systems. Expect resistance, expect judgment. Expect the world to call your authenticity selfishness, your truth irresponsibility, your awakening a breakdown. But remember, the voice calling you back to performance is the same voice that put you to sleep in the first place. It is the voice of a world that needs your performance more than it needs your presence. It is the voice that profits from your imprisonment. Beneath that voice, quieter but more real, is another voice. Your voice. The one you silence to survive. The one that knows what you actually want, what you actually feel, what you actually value. The one that has been waiting, sometimes for decades, for you to listen. That voice is calling you home, not to success, not to comfort, not to certainty, but to reality, to your reality, to the only life you actually have, the only life that is actually yours. Will you answer? Can you bear the cost of being real? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the questions your life is asking you, every day, in every moment, when you choose between authentic struggle and comfortable performance. These are the questions that will determine not whether your life looks successful, but whether it feels lived. The cost of living a life that looks good but feels wrong is everything. It is your time, your energy, your soul, your one wild and precious existence. You pay it in installments so small you barely notice, until one day you wake up and realize you have spent everything on an image, and there is nothing left for living. But there is another way. Difficult, uncertain, frightening, but authentic. A life that might not look as good, but that feels like yours. A life where the person in the mirror is someone you recognize. A life where your achievements, however modest, actually mean something. A life where you are present for your own existence. This is the possibility. This is the promise. Not happiness, not success, not comfort, but reality. The chance to exist as yourself before you die. To live your life rather than performing someone else's script. To pay the price of authenticity rather than the price of performance. And if that possibility calls to you, if some part of you, however small, however frightened, recognizes itself in this journey, then begin. Not tomorrow, not when you're ready, not when it's convenient. Begin now. Begin small. Notice one performance. Speak one truth. Make one choice toward authenticity rather than appearance. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The journey home to yourself begins with a single moment of recognition. I am not who I have been pretending to be. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's the beginning of actual existence. Welcome home. In the silence that follows, in the space between these words and your next breath, there is a choice. The same choice that has always been there, waiting beneath the performance, beneath the fear, beneath the years of accumulated falsehood. The choice to wake up. The choice to come home. The choice to pay the price of being real. What will you choose? The answer is not in these words. The answer is in what you do next, in the life you live tomorrow. In the small, brave moments when you choose truth over appearance, authenticity over approval, soul over success. This is your life, not the one that looks good, the one that is real. Live it. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. If this journey resonated with something in you, if it touched the part of yourself that knows it has been performing, share it. Not for the algorithm, not for the likes, but because someone else out there is standing in their own office, late at night, wondering if they are the only one who feels this way. They need to know they are not alone. They need to know there is another way. Until we meet again in these explorations of consciousness, I am here, echoing the truth that the ancients knew. The unexamined life is not worth living, but the examined life costs everything. What price are you willing to pay?